and welcome to the Healthy Bit podcast. This podcast is designed to talk about all the things that we can do to stack healthy habits to hopefully make a better, healthier life for ourselves so that in the future you'll thank us for it. So I'm Hayley Jarville. I'm a specialist physiotherapist, and I want to welcome my co-host, Henry Herbert.
Hello. Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, just a quick shameless plug from me, just to say, if you enjoy listening to The Healthy Bit, please do leave us a comment or like it or share it with your friends. It really helps our small fledgling project to spread its wings and fly. Also to say that we're now exclusively launching on Fountain, which is a podcasting app, but you can listen on Spotify, Apple, and all the other ones. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Healthy Bit.
And we have some very exciting things to talk about today. So Henry is amazing as a baker and a chef, and he is going to tell us all about how we can make easy, foolproof bread at home. And he's going to tell us lots of top tips on how we can make our bread as delicious as he makes it in his lovely bakery. So first of all, Henry, just tell us a little bit about your background and about your bakery.
Yeah, so thank you, Hayley. So I'm a fifth generation baker, baking in the genes, if you were. There's quite often literally flour in my trousers. Yeah, so been part of a family business, Hobbs House Bakery in the Cotswolds in the southwest of England. We've been going for over 100 years, so a lot of baking heritage. And I worked there with my brother and my uncle, my sister-in-law, my father, and lots of other members. Artisan bread that we sell through our own shops, but also to lots of wholesale customers, whether that's farm shops or pubs, etc. So we send to a whole wide range of customers. And I guess for me, I run a bakery, but I also make bread at home, which might seem like a kind of a slightly odd thing to do. But actually, I get just a real pleasure from baking at home. And I guess it helps me feel connected. My day job is sales, so actually I'm mostly in an office, answering emails or making phone calls, etc., and looking at spreadsheets. So actually, it's nice to, not just do it in theory, but do it in practice. So baking at home, actually, I find a really enjoyable thing. And if you're not privileged to have worked for a bakery that makes really good quality products, and you're, buying from the supermarket, or you don't have a huge amount of options, actually, home baking can be a great solution to get proper bread into your weekly diet.
Definitely. And I think people think that they need to leave bread out of their diet because they think that that's going to be a healthier choice, and actually that's sort of incorrect, really. And I think you'll probably have lots to say on this as well, Henry, but people tend to build up a lot of intolerances or even allergens to, or allergic reactions sometimes to the body's reactions of like sort of presenting as if they're allergic to it, because of some of the ingredients or things that they've used inside supermarket breads that can sometimes kind of feel less healthy as an option.
Yeah. 100%.
Making things from home, like you say, with the ingredients that you've got in front of you. And actually you can make bread really quite healthy, can't you?
Definitely. So I think the first point you made about people, the bread, can be part of a healthy and a varied diet. I know I've got kids, and actually often, they come back from football or rugby or whatever, or back from school, and they're just hungry and they need something to eat. And often, bread is that kind of easy go-to because, whether it's a piece of toast or a quick sandwich or, something to dip into some soup. Bread is a great filler for. Unfortunately, bread has been probably one of the worst products in terms of we've kind of screwed around with it, and we've tried to make it do lots of things that bread shouldn't do, and we've tried to make it as cheap as possible. So I guess it is that kind of it makes up a big part of people's diets, and really the bread that not all of it, but a lot of the bread you buy in the supermarket is I think we'll look back in history and be like, this wasn't a good idea. We've changed the nature of it. We've tried to make it as cheap and as cheap as possible, and last as long as possible. In doing so, we've had to degrade the quality of the ingredients. We've rushed the process so that you're no longer getting that full fermentation, and also we're putting in a load of UPFs and stabilizers and emulsifiers and numbers and all sorts of other ingredients that actually just don't need in your diet. I don't think they're good to do. So actually, making bread at home can put you back in control. And yes, you can make it as complicated as you want, but actually, it's not as difficult. It does require a little bit of planning, but actually, if you're looking to, really kind of strip out what you're eating and go back to, ingredients that you're in control of, make it at home can be done and it's possible.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's about thinking about what are your requirements and what are your needs. For me, when I'm baking, I'm often, I'm baking on the weekend. Maybe we're going to someone's house, we've got some people coming over, and I want a really, lovely kind of artisan, crusty, bubbly sourdough, something that's look great in the center of the table, and it's gonna make the house full of those wonderful smells. But it does require quite a lot of effort, and and it's probably not the best place to start. I kind of grown up working for a bakery. I've made quite a lot of bread in my life, but if you've never really done it before, it's probably the worst places. It's probably the equivalent of having never run and then deciding to do a marathon
Yeah.
on day one. Actually, you need to build up to that marathon.
Yeah.
So actually,
Exactly.
well, there's a far simpler ways to get into bread making, and then you can work out.
Yeah, because don't you need a starter or something for a sourdough? So you need to have something that's on the go all the time. So for people listening who want to kind of break away from eating supermarket bread and they know,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it's all about organic and trying to eat as good as possible, where would you start with even just the ingredients? Is using organic flour really necessary, Henry? And where do we start with it all? What's the
Okay.
easiest recipe?
The thing we say at Hobstar's Bakery to home bakers, because we get a lot of people come through either through our cookery school or they email us or they come to bakery tours. They often ask us, and the main one is, what flour should I use? And we always say, you want to find a good quality flour and you want to stick with it. So don't shop around and buy some from Moz's and then a little bit from Waitrose and then off to Tesco's and buy different brands because you could call that being a bit of a flour floozy. The issue with that is that all white flour quite often looks the same, and it's only when you're using it do you then start to feel that it reacts quite differently. Now, flour makes up the main ingredient in bread, so if you're constantly changing the flour source, you're going to have really varying results. Now, if you're kind of an amateur and you're new to it, you could get put off quite quickly. You might make a beautiful loaf, and then 2 weeks later you go again with a different flour, and you think it's going to act the same and it's completely different and you get these poor loaves and then you feel disappointed and it might put you off. So I would say find a good flour and stick with it. Now, if you're going to the supermarket, for me personally, I would look for organic just because I prefer to buy stuff that hasn't got pesticides etc on it. And actually the difference in price from organic to conventional is not so much. But really, if you're going to get seriously into bread making, you're going to say be baking bread once a week. Actually, probably the best thing you can do is buy yourself a 16-kilo sack. So there's plenty of good mills out there. So we use Shipton Mill, but there's lots of others. There's Matthews, a great one, Wild Farms, plenty that you can order online, and they'll send it directly to your door. So you get good economies of scale there. So you're going to get, the price per kilo is going to be significantly cheaper, and then you've got one consistent flour that you can work with and experiment with. Now, when it comes to bread making, you need a flour with a high protein content. It doesn't need to be super high, so anything above kind of 11, 12% will make perfectly good bread. And the way you can check that is on the nutritionals, on the label, it'll say, the calories per 100 grams, it'll have the sugars and the carbohydrates, and there'll be one that's saying protein, and you just see what the number is. And as long as that is above, say, 11, you'll be able to make bread. Now, if it's a plain flour, it'll be more like 8%, and that's going to be great for making biscuits or a Victoria sponge. But as soon as you try and make bread with it, it's just not going to have the protein which is required because that when you add water, it becomes gluten. You get this beautiful gluten network, which is what brings bread to life. So just a little bit of chemistry here. So whether you've got a sourdough or dried yeast or fresh yeast, what happens is when the yeast starts to multiply and feed on the sugars in the flour, it starts doubling. So every 20 minutes, they double and double again. And it kicks off two things: alcohol, so that's why yeast is used for making beer or wine, and carbon dioxide. And now the carbon dioxide is what we need to trap within our bread, because as those little bubbles kind of like bubble up, they get caught in this gluten network and it's a bit like a balloon, like a kind of mesh, and then it kind of inflates and lifts up, and you end up with a beautiful risen loaf with lots of little holes all over it. And really, those little holes have all the flavor. So when you bite into
Oh,
it, you get that lovely kind of bready flavor. And whereas if you try making that with a low gluten flour, sorry, a low protein flour, you won't get that. The CO2 will just disappear out of the loaf, and you'll get a very dense brick, which no one
yeah.
wants.
That's amazing. And for somebody who regularly checks labels on foods, I don't think I've ever checked a flour bag for its ingredients or its nutritional value. Because like you say, you just think, right, I've got the organic flour, that's fine, and that's what I'm using. Does also the age of the flour matter? So if you've kept it a while, and where's the best place to keep your flour?
Well, if
Especially
you
a big
so if you've got really into bread making, you might have bought yourself a little home mill. So I've actually got a mill at home. It's a bit like a kind of coffee grinder, but for grinding up grain. And when you grind your own grain, sorry, this is quite niche. You have to use the flour within a kind of 2 to 3 hour window. Otherwise, a lot of enzymatic reactions kick off when you crush the flour, and then the flour becomes very unstable, quite volatile. So you then have to age it for about 2 to 3 weeks. So when we buy flour from the mill, it's not milled fresh. They mill it and then they store it for a couple of weeks and then they deliver it to the bakery, and then that kind of settles down and you get a much more stable product. But once it's milled, the shelf life, I think a year. I mean, probably you find after a year, maybe the weevils will start moving in. That's normally a good time to get a new stack.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in terms of the simplest bread you can make, because I've seen sort of, but you obviously see various recipes, don't you? Some using just the water and the salt and the sugar and the flour and everything, and the yeast, and some where they're using olive oils and things. So what would you say is a good kind of reliable recipe that turns out pretty well every time, as a simple way to get into bread making?
Simple ways. For me, I always make a kilo. We'll start with a kilo of flour because it'll make you 2 decent sized loaves now, which for me, that would be enough for my family for the week. And yes, it'll be fresh for fresh sandwiches for the first couple of days and then toast the rest of it. Or you can freeze it if you want to keep it a little bit longer. So if you've got a kilo of flour, then to that you want to add liquid. So water is super important. And it's all about hydration levels. For a kind of simple loaf, it'd go kind of 55 to 60 5% of water to the flour. So that's about 600 grams of water. So you'd weigh that, in it goes. Then you need about 2% salt. So if you've got a kilo of flour, then you're looking at about 20 grams of salt, which does seem like quite a lot. Unseasoned bread is really disgusting. Then you need some raising agent. At home, I would always just use dry yeast. You can just buy the little sachets. You can get like a quick action one or just the normal dried yeast. I always actually go for the normal dried yeast because it doesn't have the quick action one has some extra kind of funky ingredients that make it work a bit faster, and I'm not in that much of a hurry. But just a sachet.
They already come in the, is it 7.5
Yeah,
grams?
exactly. Seven. One of those sachets will do a kilo loaf. You could put 2 in if you want. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference, but essentially a sachet is fine. And you can get fresh yeast, but it only lasts about a week, and you can't freeze it. So unless you're really keen and you want to, we do sell it at our bakery, so people turn up and just buy the 50 grams. If you're using fresh yeast, you do double the amount of dried yeast because it's less costly. So if the recipe says 10 grams of dried yeast, use 20 grams of fresh yeast. So just a little conversion. Right. And then, so once you've got your flour, your water, your salt, and your yeast, well, then you're good to go. So all you've got to do is you've got to mix it until all of the wet is mixed into the dry. And then you need to knead it. So if you've got a KitchenAid, you can put it on the dough hook and get it going for about 8 minutes or so. But actually, I'm a big fan of using my hands and getting a good stretch on. And really, what you're trying to do is you're putting your energy into that dough. It's going to warm it up. Oh yeah. Also, sorry, I should have mentioned that you need to make sure when you put your water in that it's tepid. So like a disappointing bath. So the optimal temperature is about 26 degrees. So when you kind of dip it in, it's like you definitely, it's cold. And
so it's not really that warm. It's sort of like more like what you'd bath a baby in, or is that too warm?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like a baby.
Yeah.
And that's is really good for activating the yeast and getting everything going. And actually, with bread making, you just want to get some energy into it and get it moving. If you start with cold water, it's fine, but everything just takes a lot longer. And then the temptation is that you don't proof it enough or ferment it and develop enough flavor. So now you've mixed it all together, and then you need to knead it, and you need to knead it for about 10 minutes. There's no really kind of shortcut in this. So what I would do is try and find a song that lasts about 10 minutes or so and press it, and then just you've got to get working, and you can swap your arms and stuff, and make sure you clear a nice bit of work surface. You've got a bit of space, and And then what is really helpful is if you have a dough scraper. Now, these are basically like a little plastic scraper that you can use to just
Yeah.
scrape things up again. And the dough will feel sticky. And the temptation is to add more flour. But actually, if you add more flour, uh, you'll end up with a drier loaf. So
Oh,
it starts off sticky, it's sticking to your hand. Actually, as you start developing that gluten and getting that stretch, you'll find that the dough becomes kind of silky and soft, and it becomes less sticky, and it kind of holds its shape a bit better. And that happens after about 10 minutes of kneading. So and that's probably one of the biggest common mistakes we see is that people freak out. It's really wet, so they add more flour, and then by the time they started kneading it, then very dry, and then the loaf is very dense and doesn't have
yeah.
it needs that a bit of moisture for it to be able to kind of express itself. So now you've kneaded your dough; it's all nice and soft and stretchy, and it's feeling good. You now need to give this what we call a bulk ferment, and this is basically the first proof. So the yeast is just starting to kick into gear. Every 20 minutes, it doubles. So at the moment, there's very little activity. So we put it into a bowl, cover it with a tea towel or something to stop it drying out, and then you want to put it somewhere warm. Now, at this time of year, if you've got your central heating on, your ambient temperature will be fine. If your house is very, very cold, you can find a kind of warm place to put it, whether that's by your boiler or some people find they put it in their oven, but just with the light on, so then that can kind of heat up to about 30 degrees. But it needs to be somewhere warm, and it'll take between 45 minutes to an hour, and it'll essentially balloon up and double in size. So that's the first bulk ferment, and then you take it out and you knock it back, and that expels lots of the air. And the good thing with dried yeast or fresh yeast is that you get two rises out of it. And the first rise, it's all a bit kind of volatile, a bit crazy. The second rise is a bit more consistent, but also in the second one you'll get more flavour. So you're giving it a longer ferment. And at this point, you can decide what you're going to do with it. So you could make little rolls, and you could put them on a tray and let them prove up, and you'd have you probably from a kilo dough you'd get a dozen rolls or so, which would be good for sandwiches or whatnot. You could use it for pizza. So it would make quite a basic pizza, but it'd be perfectly passable. It's not going to be like a beautiful sourdough one, but it's, your kids would like it. Or you can, if you've got a tin, just a little bit of olive oil inside the tin, stop sticking, and then you want to just mold it, and it's kind of hard to describe it. But essentially, you're looking to kind of fold it in on itself. So you've got like a kind of sausage, and then you want a seam along the bottom, and then you turn that over, and the seam goes on the bottom of the tin, and then again you cover it with a tea towel, and you let that prove up again for another 45 minutes to an hour till it's coming off the top of the tin, and then whilst that's proving, you preheat your oven, so you need to crank your oven up to like 220 degrees or so, and then you chuck you place very carefully the tin into the oven, and then I always just put a tray at the bottom and chuck a cup of water into the oven, and then you shut the door, and then you leave it for about 15 minutes without opening the door. And what that steam does is it does a couple of things. One is it creates a really steamy environment. So as the dough starts to heat up in that kind of intense heat, it stops it from setting, so it allows it to kind of open up and grow a bit more, but also it gives you a really lovely crust. Now, this is when you're getting bread from a bakery, they'll have professional bread ovens, and often ovens at home aren't really designed for bread making, or they don't have the steam is allowed to escape quite rapidly because they're not fully sealed. So you just have to experiment a little bit. But I find with mine, if I put a tray in the bottom and chuck a kind of half a pint of water in, that keeps enough kind of moisture in the oven for about 15 minutes. Then you open the door, let all the steam out, and then if there's still water in the tray, remove the tray, and then allow it another 10 minutes or so for the loaf just to kind of brown up in a dry heat. And then obviously the main thing you got to make sure is that it's cooked all the way through. So the easiest way to check is to take it out of the tin and give it a little tap. And if it sounds kind of hollow, like if it looks kind of golden brown, it smells delicious, it smells like bread. If it's kind of pale, flaccid, and looks raw, it probably is not bread. So you just have to use your common sense here. But generally speaking, 25 minutes at 200 degrees, it's going to be pretty much cooked. And then once the loaf is baked, if you want to get really technical, you can stick a digital thermometer in, and as long as it's above like 90 degrees, then the inside is cooked. If it's registering 40 degrees, you're still going to have raw dough in there, so you need to cook it a little bit longer. And particularly if you're baking really big loaves and you're a bit nervous about whether it's cooked inside or baked inside, that's a good way of doing it. And then you need to let it cool down. You should never try and cut up bread fresh out of the oven. What happens is all of the starches in the flour are always kind of scrambled up into the the inside will be very fragile, and then as it cools down, the starches start to form together and form these strong bonds, and that takes about 25 to 30 minutes or so. Then you can cut up and you can devour. And I'd say
Oh.
the downside of making bread at home is that on the day of baking, you'll consume probably more bread than you require.
Yes.
But hey, that comes with the warning.
No, that's so good, Henry. And you mentioned a couple of times using a tea towel. And
Yeah.
do you use a damp one or just a dry one, or does
Just
it not
yeah,
matter?
just a dry clean one. I mean, you could use a bit of cling film. It's just essentially to stop it skinning over. So then, and then with that dough, so that's a very simple dough. If you wanted to give it a bit more shelf life and make it a bit softer, you add some fat. So the easiest fat to add are either olive oil or butter. Butter will give you a slightly more kind of like a softer kind of brioche feel, whereas olive oil you'll get a slightly more kind of crispy feel. But again, any kind of fat will improve shelf life. You can add sugar, though I don't tend to add sugar because I don't think it's required. Um, uh, or the other
Yeah,
thing you
that's
can do,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
lots of
that's interesting with sugar because it's supposed to activate the yeast or something, isn't it?
yeah,
So you don't use the sugar.
it's a load of bollocks. So the yeast, the sugar does feed the yeast, but there's sugar in the flour. So like you don't, because
Oh,
flour is a carbohydrate, is sugar, isn't it? And so yeah, you don't need to add sugar. I think that's one of those like someone must have written
the-
the recipe in like the 80s before they, went up fashionable, and then no one's ever checked it, and then every time they just Google bread recipe, they just keep recycling the same one. So anyway, don't add sugar; it's not needed. You can put jam and honey on your bread. I'm not gonna, you don't need it in bread. You do need the salt though. Salt is super important. It not only gives it flavor, but also if you don't put salt in, the salt helps regulate the yeast. So without the salt, you can get very kind of volatile breadfruit in. And so it's a bit like a kind of parental guidance on some teenagers out in Magaluf for the first time. The salt helps just, it keeps them in check just a little bit. The other thing the salt does is that it helps give it really nice color. Without the salt, you'll get a very kind of dull, quite an unattractive loaf. We always know at the bakery when the salt's been forgotten because the bread comes out and it looks dreadful, and it's normally the salt that's been forgotten.
oh, that's interesting,
Um,
isn't it?
so salt is
Yeah.
important. The other thing you can do, which I know that you're always talking about trying to get more fiber in your diet, is that you could put in some whole milk flour is great. So that's got the whole grain, and so you're getting all of the nutritionals with it, all the fiber and all the bran, etc. But when you add some whole milk flour, I wouldn't go 100% whole milk straight away because it does make the dough tricky to handle. White flour is certainly easier, but maybe start off with 25%. So if you've got a kilo of white flour, make it 750, and then do 250 grams of whole milk flour, and then you just need to up your moisture content, so your water, by maybe 10%. So if you've got 550 grams of water, make it 600 or 650. So just add a bit extra because the bran will absorb more water than the white, and so you'll end up with a very dry loaf. So if you're making wholemeal, it just needs to be slightly wetter. Um,
That makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
then just
Does it
follow the
matter?
same.
Yeah, does it matter what salt you use? Like, I assume table salt's a no-no, and do you prefer like the Cornish sea salts and that
Yeah,
kind of thing? Or
I'm in the West Country, so yeah, I like Cornish sea salt. But you could use any kind of flaky salt or any sea salt. Just do. But yeah, sea salt's fine.
okay, that sounds great. There's loads of top tips in that, Henry. I'm
Mm.
sure. Yeah, I was doing I didn't put the water in when you bake the bread, so that's a thing. And I was probably one of those people who adds the flour because it's sticking.
Yeah,
And when you mention you're kneading it, so you're literally taking the bread out and not putting it onto any floured surface to start with. You're just going
no,
for it straight
yeah,
away.
just need it. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
and the thing with bread making is that this is a 20-minute introduction. It's a lifetime of learning, for something so simple. And once you kind of dive into that rabbit hole, you realize it goes deep and it gets complicated really quickly. And a lot of it is misguided, or it confuses people, or it puts people off. And I think for me, when it comes to bread making, so we have a cookery school and we get a lot of people coming in, and often I ask them right at the beginning, like, how many of you are expecting to leave here like a baking ninja, like someone who can, like, make this a wonderful sourdough that's going to look beautiful, and everyone puts their hand up, and you're like, that's not going to happen today. I can like start you on your journey, but that requires probably 10,000 hours of practicing until you're going to be a master. I'm sorry. And so I think for me, bread making, it's like if you've never done it before, Just start simple. Don't overcomplicate, and you can work up to it. And it's the same probably with exercise. Just don't start trying to lift, the heaviest weights. Start low and build up, and actually get your confidence, and then you'll get better. And there's some great communities out there. There's lots of good cookery schools. There's loads of good information online. And I'll share this recipe, and I'll share my sourdough recipe. And I think we've even got some video links. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And if you're looking to take back control of all the ingredients that go into your body, particularly when it comes to bread, then making it from scratch, that is a great step.
Exactly. And like you said, in just 20 minutes, you've now shown us how to make a white loaf and a wholemeal loaf. And it's lovely because you've given us such clear guidance there, Henry. It's really easy to follow. And I'm sure everyone's going to feel super proud of the bread that they make, having listened to this, and will just feel more confident knowing that they're doing the right thing. So that's super. So thanks so much for sharing that, Henry. I know I can't wait to give it a go, and I can let you know how I get on.
Thanks, Hayley. Well, till next time.
Yes. See you on the next episode.